Biological Science Technician at Heinz National Wildlife Refuge at Tinicum. After graduating from Randolph-Macon College in 2014 with a degree in biology and environmental studies, he traveled the country working for the federal government everywhere from Alaska to Florida, Michigan to Texas. Garrett's job is to improve the unique habitats of the refuge for the plants and animals that utilize America's first urban refuge. His passion is connecting people to nature, helping folks appreciate its beauty just a little bit more than they did before. So without further ado, Garrett, excited to have you.
Thank you so much and welcome everybody. I'm hoping you're able to get something out of this, and I'm very excited to be here with you all. So for today's presentation, I'm going to talk about who we are, both John Heinz, and how we got here, where we are, just in Southwest Philly, and then talk about our standards of excellence and how we approach our work, as well, and particularly when it comes into pollinator corridors, our long-term restoration projects, why John Heinz is important to the community. For those of you in the area, if you're interested in volunteering at the refuge, as well as any questions that you have at the end. So hopefully there's plenty of time for that. So a little bit about myself. I started at the refuge back in 2019, so coming up on 4 years. And as Tara mentioned, I graduated from a small school in Richmond, Virginia called Randolph-Macon College, where I majored in environmental studies and biology. And my job at the refuge is habitat management and planning, trying to make that habitat as good as possible. A lot of it is removing invasive species, but also working on the long-term plan. Where do we want this habitat to be in 5 years, in 10 years, so on and so forth. And then also connecting people to nature, and making sure that they're learning as much as they can about it and appreciating everything that's there. And for those who aren't aware, John Heinz National Wildlife Refuge is a part of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which is part of the Department of the Interior. We're a federal agency, very similar to National Park Service, but just with a slightly different mission where we put wildlife first is the phrase we like to use. And we have a lot of wildlife-dependent recreation, things like wildlife photography, hiking, hunting, fishing, things like that. So that's our focus, and so you understand where we're coming from. So a little bit of refuge history. We were established in 1972, and to particularly protect Tinicum Marsh. And what's really unique about our history is that we were community driven. Tinicum Marsh is the largest remaining freshwater tidal marsh in Pennsylvania, about 350 or so acres. And the community knew in the 70s, knew that it was important to protect a place like this and to prevent the Interstate 95 from being built literally right across from it. So they banded together and were able to convince and lobby Congress to protect this area from long-term development. And our focus, which is also very unique, is on environmental education. We're the America's first urban refuge, and which comes with its own special designation, where our mission is to kind of be the face of Fish and Wildlife Service in this area in Philadelphia, and communicate that message to everyone who comes and visits or that we run into. We were originally called Tinicum National Wildlife Refuge, and we were renamed in 1991 to honor the late Senator John Heinz of Pennsylvania. And we're also part of the Urban Wildlife Conservation Program, which is important because it brings us to our standards of excellence. These are the steps that we take to guide our work. So the two most important ones of the 8 are know and relate to the community and to be a community asset. We focus on knowing our community, hearing their voices, and making sure that when we make management decisions, that we're not making these decisions in a bubble, that we're taking their thoughts, opinions, and voices heard, that everyone has a voice and it should be heard, particularly in Southwest Philadelphia, where it is an environmental injustice community, which is a phrase that the community members use. And so we connect people with nature, via stepping stones. So little things here and there, you know, starts with webinars, and all of a sudden 2 years from now, some of y'all might be volunteering and helping us pull out some invasive species. So you never know where these things start. And so for where we are at the refuge, we're basically that entire, let me turn on my laser pointer here. So we're more or less this entire dark space here. And I bring this image, this Google image, to show you just how much development is all around here. All that silver space is impervious surfaces. You've got the airport down here. I-95 is coming right across from right there. And the main part of Philadelphia is up over in this direction. And this is really important to understand that we're this little island of oasis, or this oasis of natural habitat in this area. Tinicum Marsh, this middle section here, this 350, used to be about 6,000 acres. It used to be this entire section up here, more or less. And because of development and whatnot, it has been reduced to 350 acres. And what that leads to are some conservation challenges, such as lots and lots of flooding, and of course, trash, invasive species. We have sea level rise, climate change, and all of this impacts us, not only us, but our community members in the community that surrounds us, Eastwick, Kingsessing, and other parts of Southwest Philadelphia. But we have our own conservation goals as well, that we really want more resilient habitat for both wildlife and people. And we do that, we tackle this through doing both refuge inside and refuge out as well. Part of our refuge out is our pollinator corridor. It might surprise you that in Philadelphia, there are a number of vacant lots in the area. But we work with community leaders and community organizations to build pollinator gardens in these vacant lots with you see the purple area there on the right side of your screen. This is some of our focus area, connecting us to the zoo, the Philadelphia Zoo, and with the help of numerous partners. We certainly do not do this by ourselves. With the help of numerous partners, we foster these community connections to identify the lots where we can make a difference, and work to make sure that these gardens are maintained. Some of our partners include Audubon Mid-Atlantic, Thomas Jefferson University, National Wildlife Federation, and a couple of community development corporations, Empowered CDC and Boost CDC, as well as Eastwick Friends and Neighbors Coalitions. And these are folks that help us identify sites and help with the management of these. Particularly, it's important because we want to ensure that we have adequate long-term resources. And so we're always asking these community members and these community leaders, what does this community neighborhood need for this to thrive? And I'll have an example in a little bit. And our key takeaways, and something I'm hoping that y'all are able to take away from this, is that when you're having these conversations about, how to do just a little bit more, and how to we're all trying to do things in our own personal yards and whatnot, but how do we take that space down the street and turn it into something that can be ecologically productive or beneficial? And in that process, we're listening to these community leaders and we're being flexible. Sure, in an ideal world, it'd be great to have the entire city covered with trees and flowers and plants, but we have to be flexible and understand that community leaders want a safe space for their children to play. They want a safe place for events. And so, okay, well, maybe we can just put a strip of pollinator plants over here and also put in the playground on the side. So there's ways to compromise where everybody succeeds. And when we put in these pollinator plants and when we put in these, put the work in, there's a number of things that we consider. Many of these, I suspect y'all are familiar with when you're talking about pollinator gardens, and it's the same things that we look at each site. So we're looking at the soil types and the sun exposure. Is a building going to shade it out? Is it a white building, or is it light or darker painted building that affects how much light it gets? We're looking at of course, we want to consider the bloom period and the bloom color, making sure that there's food for these pollinators all throughout the year, or certainly throughout their year. And we're looking at the moisture needs. Is this a wetter site? Does the water drain to a certain area? These are all the various factors that we take into place when we work with these community leaders to identify these sites. And when it really comes down to is managing our expectations when it comes to working with these community leaders. It's never as simple as plant these plants and everything is great and we can move on to the next thing. It takes longer. You have to invite community members, get them on board, build a lot of coalitions, and then really planning for that maintenance. The speed of the work, it takes longer than you think sometimes. There's rain delays, and you need to figure out how we can involve folks from all different ages, so youth crews and community members, block captains. And so the more that we can work with other people and get their buy-in, the better, because we're not going to be on site every single day, but the folks who live there are, and they're the ones that care about it the most. And so as long as we are able to work with them to identify their sites, we're happy to help as much as we can to convert as many of these vacant lots as possible. One of our success stories is Cecil Street Garden off of Cecil Street in Southwest Philadelphia. This is one of our work projects, one of our success stories that just 2 weeks ago we opened after a couple of years and of course pandemic delays of getting this project off the ground. But it was a vacant lot full of short dumping and issues with invasive species, things like that. But we were able to identify a block captain who, she calls this her, it's a place where the city just goes to peace and it's quiet. And an ambulance might drive by, but for some reason it seems a little bit quieter there than inside her house, which is just around the corner. But to get there, along the way, it didn't just happen overnight. We had meetings where we talked with community leaders about, all right, what are the different designs? How do we, what do you want? What do you want it to look like? How many plants, how much gravel, et cetera, et cetera. Endless amount of meetings, it seems like, but it's beneficial because everyone's voice is being heard and we're being that community asset and listening to community members. We got out there in the upper right there, you'll see we got there and we brought our heavy equipment to help move some dirt around and get to work after a little bit. With the Carpenters Union in Philadelphia, we were able to build a very awesome gazebo, and it turned into a vacant lot into what is now a thriving pollinator garden, community meeting space, and there are caretakers who are going to work to keep this clean and keep this as a productive community space into the future. And so those are kind of some of the things that we're looking forward to. And we're not, backing off or anything. We're going to stay involved, but we, having that on the ground help is super important. And it also helps when we have these community groups and we're doing those meetings to have examples. Back in October of 2020 at the refuge, we replanted all of these areas with 20 some odd different species of plants and seeds to create examples of pollinator gardens and what it could look like at the refuge. So if you're able to come down here, kind of anywhere you see where there's parking, we've planted it and we tried to maintain it as best in our capacity. So a number of different gardens, and it's looking pretty good so far if anyone has been out there. And now that we're back on the refuge, I can talk a little bit more about some of our, some of the species that we think about and we focus on at the refuge, particularly when it comes to our larger restoration projects. So there's a few different mussel species, as well as a couple other wetland species, the southern leopard frog, Atlantic coast leopard frog, and the northern red-bellied cooter, as well as over 300 different bird species. If any of you are birders in South Philly, you probably, or in South Jersey, you've probably come to John Heinz. We get a number of birds, and there's a large birding community who'd love to come out there and see what it's like. And so we take these areas and try to improve it for these species, along with others, of course. This is just touching on them. One of our projects that we just finished up is called our Turkey Foot restoration. There's 3 trails that come together in a certain portion where we converted these tidal ponds there, the 2 kind of in the middle of your screen there, these 2 ponds, and we were able to the edge of these, if you follow my cursor, the edge of these, the bank kind of went like this. It was just rectangular and angular, and what you really want is a nice gradual slope. And so we were able to use heavy equipment and a partner in a grant to make this slope nice and gradual, and then replant it with native species. And this fall we've now had 1 full growing season, and what this does is it allows this, more or less non-function area or limited function area to help improve that flood capacity, and planted with pollinator plants. It becomes habitat for nesting turtles, some of the exposed areas. And then this entire area, these invasive species, it's what was dominating it, is now more or less native species. And so now we're in the process of maintaining it long term. And I bring this up, the flood capacity part, because the flooding is incredibly difficult for Southwest Philadelphia. If you remember a few years back, Hurricane Isaias came through and we actually had torrential flooding at the refuge, but also upstream, a number of community members had flooding in their back door. And so the more that we can improve the flooding capacity of the marsh, the better. So here are some pics of that restoration as it went. So this is kind of what it looked like beforehand as they were moving some dirt around. And then we took that pond and we kind of really made it nice and gradual, nice and flat all the way across, and replanted it. So we more or less started it from scratch is probably another way to kind of think about it. Put our trail camera up, and this is kind of what it looks like at more or less at low tide during the construction last fall. And then now the tide can reach a lot higher and go a lot farther into it. And if you come to the refuge today, though it's a little bit more grown up now than this photo from the summer, there are a number of species growing up in here, including some wild rice, which we didn't even plant, which was great. So we're already getting native species to come back from the soil, as well as a bunch of let's see, was it marsh tick seed? We had a number of other beneficial plants from our seed bank, as well as a number of bushes and shrubs that we put out there as well. So we're interested to see how this kind of keeps growing over the next couple of years, and how it improves the function of this area as a marsh. One of our larger restoration projects, a pretty ambitious one that's going to happen in the next few years, is what we're calling Darby Creek Trail Marsh Restoration, which is this whole kind of shape here. And it's about 150 acres. And what happened was we are working within this marsh that remains about 2 to 4 feet of historic fill from various dredging projects. And just, back in the past, the idea was marshes aren't important. They are dirty, rotten, stinking, smelly, bug infested places. They're not important at all. Let's just fill them up and it's no big deal. Turns out that freshwater tidal marshes are the most productive ecosystem on the planet. Who knew? And so our goal is to fix the hydrology and to put it back so that it can function as it's supposed to. If you look at it right now, it's minimally connected. There's one up here and another opening down here, but you don't get a lot of very good tidal flushing. It's not very efficient, and it doesn't work like it's supposed to. It's a semi-degraded marsh. And the 3 functions of marshes, the 3 F's that I like to talk about, marshes serve as flood protection, and the ability to act as a sponge and absorb water during storm events. Filtration, they help take out both large contaminants and also smaller contaminants, so they are really great filters in improving water quality. And then lastly, they serve as a food source. both for people in terms of fishing, but also as a nursery so that these smaller fish can grow up to be larger fish. So we want to make sure we have nice, big, healthy marshes. And so one of our ways to do that is we had some modeling done, and our plan is to dredge about another 13,000 linear feet of tidal channels, and to open another breach in that in the dike that's on this outer edge here. So this is on the left side is our current at low tide and our current at high tide, and then on the right is our again our low tide and high tide for what our new hope is. And though it might not, the blue areas might seem like very similar, but there are some very important differences. Particularly at low tide, there's water connectivity the entire time. Also, because there's another breach in there, it allows for more flushing, so that you have enhanced marsh function, which is only going to help your mussels, particularly the ones that I mentioned earlier, American eels, American shad. It improves the water quality. Water is able to come in and out and flush a lot better than it currently does. That increased fish passage is important. And then lastly, I'll go back real quick. All the dredge material that we're going to basically suck out to make this is going to be put over here at this kind of large triangle. It's about 16 acres, and which is currently dominated by Phragmites, Japanese hops, and a couple other invasive species. And we're literally going to take all this and just bury this and then plant scrub shrub habitat on top, assuming we got good soil that we're getting out of the marsh. But that allows us to create a scrub shrub habitat that is relatively rare in the area. And so hopefully in due time will become a important early successional forest habitat for migratory songbirds and pollinators. Key aspects of this project as well are expanding visitor access, particularly activities such as we're going to add a kayak launch, observation tower so folks can really see the scale of this area and its importance and see how things have changed or watch it change over time, as well as more fishing access and bird watching, particularly for the systematically excluded communities such as Eastwick, folks who weren't allowed to come into areas and protected areas or felt that they weren't allowed to come into these areas. So this project and this restoration and some of the other activities of part of the grant that we have to do this is helping to increase and expand access for environmental education activities to our diverse audiences that use the refuge. And this project also enhances the assets that community members see in the refuge, as that it's a place for peace and quiet to recharge. Why among many reasons do we go to natural areas? One of our larger goals and our ultimate goal, still many years down the road, is we have a 150-acre impoundment. If you've been to the refuge, you've probably walked this loop. It's about 3-ish mile loop, 150 acres overall, that we would like to restore about half of it to tidal marsh. Let the marsh do what the marsh does. And it will allow it to function and provide those 3 Fs for community members and for the environment better than the freshwater impoundment that it is right now. We don't have a firm timeline for this project. We're working on identifying funding sources to do this, but the next steps are also to model where is the best place to literally probably build a new dike across this, and where do we open it so that it is functional, so that what we're doing is as impactful as possible. So we're doing that modeling and that feasibility study. And all these projects and all of our work is important because, as I just mentioned, John Heinz National Wildlife Refuge is a place for community members to rest and to recharge. It's especially important in Eastwick for the members there. Someone mentioned that they walked their dog there already and have been out and about. So we see these folks, we talk to them, we're happy to interact with them. And this area is a environmental injustice community. These are words that come from community members that John Heinz helps to improve their mental and emotional state, and to give them that peace when the concrete jungle is being the concrete jungle. These projects are also working to reduce the impacts of flooding on the community, which is responding to their concerns. So one of their biggest things is what happens when it rains. What happens when you get just a heavy thunderstorm and then now water's in their basement. So the more that we can improve the function of the marsh in the long term, the better it's going to be for community members. John Heinz also serves as a place to deepen folks' connection to nature. And we also work to begin to change any negative perceptions of marshes that still persist. And as I mentioned, this is knowing and relating to our community, harking back to our standards of excellence, knowing and relating to our community, what are their needs and how can we be a community asset for everybody. Ways to volunteer and get involved at the refuge. So we kind of a stepping stone. You hear that phrase a lot. It starts for a lot of folks at our Stewardship Saturdays, which are the second Saturday of every month. We just had one this past weekend, so you're a little late, y'all. But it's a second Saturday, generally from 9 until noon, where we assisted with generally large projects, and we try to build that community of folks who just want to improve it just a little bit at a time. Every little bit helps. Folks will hear me say that a lot. This past weekend, for instance, we all got some loppers and it was a little rainy, but we cut some invasive vines to free up some trees that we planted over the last couple of years, some oaks and dogwoods and things like that. So it was a good way to just get out, free some plants, and keep them growing until those plants are big enough to shade out some of those invasive species that are keeping taking over. Our next step after the Stewardship Saturdays for most folks is to become one of our weed warriors. These are folks that really want to learn all the different species, that really want to, we phase it in so that folks can learn some as over the course of a few months to learn to identify, learn where and how to dispose, and what to do to get rid of them and to keep getting at them until they're gone, and how to plant native species in their place. The benefits of this one is that it fits your schedule. We have our tools publicly available. We have a sign in, sign out book. And so it allows folks who, if you have an atypical schedule, if you're retired and you want to come in on Tuesday mornings at 10 o'clock, great, come on in, and we're happy to help get you set up and teach you. It's all about communication. And then eventually what happens for other folks is what we call our Adopt a Plot program. These are for the very dedicated folks who really want to know all of them. And there are some folks who it's almost their second career that they said, I want to learn all 30 invasive species, 30 plus invasive species. And we more or less point out a set area and you set the pace, and you are in charge of removing the invasives from this area. And as folks learn over the years, it takes time to master all of these species and to learn about them. There's always new information coming out, but it's a way to kind of watch nature, get your hands dirty and say, all right, well, what I do in March is way different than what I'm going to do in November. So everything kind of changes throughout the year and you get to kind of watch it grow and expand and change. So it's a really great way for folks to get involved. And these are just some of the biology related ones. If there are other volunteer opportunities that you'd be interested in, we're always open to that conversation. We have volunteers who lead bird walks, plant ID walks, tree talks, folks who just want to work at the front desk for a few hours a week, 3-4 hours, and they answer the phone calls and help direct folks to the information that they need. There's bus walks, photographers, a little bit of everything. If you're interested, you can just send me an email and I'll put you in contact with the right person. I'm happy to be that mediator for folks. And with that, I think I'm a little short on time, but we have plenty of time for questions now. And while y'all are getting your questions into the chat, I did get one question ahead of time that I'll go ahead and jump over to. So what the question I got ahead of time, more or less, sorry, I'm just going to paraphrase, was how is global warming affecting plant life and pollinators in our area, particularly when it comes to hummingbirds and butterflies. And I threw some quick notes onto the slide there, but basically more research is needed, but the initial results are actually relatively promising, particularly when it comes to some of our other pollinators. At the refuge, we recently worked with Drexel University to do a large-scale bee survey to identify every single one of our bees at the refuge. And our results are relatively surprising in that we had 94 species. And there's a lot more to come when it comes to analyzing this, but we had 94 different species of bees that utilize the refuge, at least throughout the summer, which is very, very good, very high diversity. The initial results are showing that about a third of them are new records for Philadelphia County, which that could be a number of things. You know, that could be range shifts, that could be just that they're understudied. You know, a lot of bees and wasps aren't the most studied creatures out there. So a lot of questions, as all good research has. There's more questions than answers that comes with these things. And when it comes to the hummingbirds, I did want to. Though I'm a biologist, I do not know everything, of course, but I do know how to identify good sources. And so Audubon.org is one of the good places to look at where the effects of climate change on individual bird species. In general, there's going to be a lot of species shifts and more stress. So I grabbed some screenshots from their website, and I specifically looked at John Heinz's zip code. You can that link back there was to where you can look at zip codes and see the effects of which species are most in peril, all the way to what is stable. On the right side there of your screen, you've got the effect of the predicted effect of climate change on ruby-throat hummingbird, the only hummingbird species on the East Coast. And you'll see that's mostly stable, and it actually is a relatively large area of new habitat for them. It looks like they're going to lose some of their western expansion. But when you look at Audubon's website, what they're saying is that some of the new stresses include, spring heat waves, as well as habitat destruction and fragmentation. So those are two of the bigger things that. And I will say that in general, those are the two things that are going to impact a lot of the plants and animals in our region and honestly go globally. So hopefully that answers your question. I'm not going to call the person out who asked that, but hopefully that answers your question. With that, I do have some resources I'll throw into the chat for pollinator gardens, places that we look when we are looking at our species and comparing lists, because there are hundreds of species and I certainly do not have them all memorized. And so I'm constantly referencing these things, looking at deer-resistant plants, as well as some good seed mixes from Xerces and Ernst Seeds, as well as pollinator.org has a lot of great information. So once I'm going to hop off my screen here in a second. Where's my stop presenting button? There we go. And I will throw these into the chat while we look at some of the Q&A and chat questions.
All right, Garrett, that was awesome. By the way, I personally learned a lot, and that was my intention with this. I wanted to hear all about what goes on at the Wildlife Refuge, and I was especially impressed right out of the gate of the community involvement. I had no idea that the the Heinz National Wildlife Refuge was so involved in the surrounding community. It was so cool to hear, and it makes me want to be involved.
And this is just, and I'll just say, this is just one of the things that the biology programs does. And I only touch on it, I should say. And our visitor services, our all-star visitor services staff, they do a ton of work as well. We have an entire position, our community engagement specialist, whose job it is to attend these meetings and listen to these leaders and hear those voices and make sure it's being communicated. So we put a lot of time and effort and resources into doing it because we believe it is so important. One of my personal philosophy on a lot of this is, if we're not connecting people, if people aren't listening, if they're not getting things out of nature, it doesn't matter how many biological studies I do. If people don't know to care, why they care, if they're not putting their voices, their time and energy into nature, in 50 years, it's not really going to matter. And so this is why, I want folks to care, and why I care so much about connecting people to nature.
It sounds like it just sounds like it's been such a success, and it's going to be an ongoing success. And I need to get over there and visit. I promise you, I absolutely will before it gets too cold. But we have several questions in the Q&A, and I'll just go right down the list. Christine asks, how saline is the water in the wetlands, and what species of turtles nest there?
Ooh, fun. So John Heinz is entirely freshwater. So 0.0000 is the salinity there. And hopefully it stays that way. What's really interesting is that the salt line, where brackish water, where you start measuring that, it's about a dozen miles or so downstream of us. And what I've heard from a Philadelphia Water County or Water Department webinar once is that there are enough dams that control enough water along the Delaware River, all the way up, New York, all the way down, that they can actually release enough water to keep that salt line about at that spot. It was kind of wild, which is why when you hear about these droughts and whatnot, you don't hear any concerns about saltwater lines and whatnot. It's because Philadelphia gets its water from the Delaware River, and they filter it, of course, our drinking water, I should say. And so they filter it, and so they want to make sure that they're not also sucking up salt water. And so it's important to them to keep it down there. So kind of a fun fact out there. I've been meaning to find that webinar and rewatch it, but it's pretty cool.
I had no idea. That was super interesting. Another Christine, I think it's a different Christine, asks, will the fish there be edible?
This is where I like to introduce the concept of edible versus eatable. Technically it's edible, but I would not eat anything out of the water. I mentioned in passing that there's a super fun site on the refuge. There's two old landfills from, 50s or so. And the EPA is working to clean them up, cap them and whatnot, but there are still contaminants in the water. We continually test the fish and check on them. The state works on it. But the state says that, their recommendation is no more than one meal per month, as opposed to their normal recommendation of no more than one fish per week. So it's more restrictive to eat out of the refuge or Darby Creek, I should say. Personally, I would not eat anything out of the refuge, but it's about the long-term risk of the repeated exposure to certain types of cancer and repeated exposure to chemicals that lead to certain types of cancer. So, one meal you'll be fine. You're not going to get acutely sick unless you undercook it. But one of the things that we focus on too at the refuge is, we have a large immigrant population where English is not necessarily their first language. And so we at Heinz, and I try to talk to fishermen whenever I see them. And, a guy like me shows up in a uniform and they're like, uh-oh. And it's like, no, we just want to see, are you aware that that fishing here, that totally fine, and you're doing a great job. Good luck catching some stuff. But just be aware of the health effects of routinely eating it. And it's difficult because for a lot of folks, it's not just a recreational activity. It is subsistence, and it is about supplementing their diet for them and their families. And so they have to weigh the short-term risks, the short-term reward for the long-term risks. And so we try to have those conversations with folks. We put signs up in various languages and try to make sure that folks are at least at a minimum aware of it as much as we can.
All right. Moving on down the list. Laura asks, can you explain what an impoundment is?
Yes, and I'm so glad you asked this question. I'm going to reshare my screen. Because I left one slide off and I was like, well, someone's gonna ask. Let me throw it at the very end. Let's see. This should work. And then if I go here and then like that. Nope. Went right to the very front. There it is. Cool. So an impoundment is, think of it kind of like a pond. That our impoundment, our 150 or so acres, is we manage the water level throughout the year. The impoundment means we can hold back the water and then release it throughout the year as necessary. So at this point, I like to start in the spring, where in the wintertime we've had the water high and we start bringing it down and we start lowering the water level sometime in April or so. And our goal is to expose mudflats for the migratory shorebirds that are coming through around that time, April, May, somewhere in there. And it exposes those mudflats for those birds, providing a food source for them, all the fun bugs and stuff as they start digging through the muck. And then that sunlight stimulates the growth so that in the summer here, when it's at its lowest point, all that sun heats up the seed bank in here and stimulates a lot of growth of native plants, spatterdock, wild rice, a number of other things that provide pollinator habitat. They provide nesting habitat, and these are all grasses. A lot of them are grasses that produce seeds, which is super important because by the time they produce their seeds in the fall, we're starting the process of raising that water level back up. I'm talking like a couple feet here. This is not anything too drastic, but these inches matter. It's the difference between being exposed versus being 6 inches underwater, where the seas now become food for everything migrating through. And then as well, once we hit full pool up here in the wintertime, where we'll be at some point in December, at full pool, it becomes a winter food source for all your dabbling and diving ducks. So, that's why you'll see, if you come to the refuge in January, you'll see thousands of different thousands of ducks and geese, generally a dozen different species out there. And on any given day, you never know what's going to coming through to see it. So it's really kind of fun to be out there, but they're eating all that stuff that started in the spring that grow. So our impoundment, what is an impoundment? It's a habitat type that allows us to mimic and produce habitat for migratory birds. There are many other benefits. This is a little bit of an oversimplification, but this is a good way to kind of see it. So if you see the water level in the impoundment up or down or whatever, now you have a vague idea of how it works, as opposed to Darby Creek, which is tidal and it changes 5-foot tide elevations every day. So stop sharing. There you go.
That is awesome. I've never heard that term before, so I just had like a ton of information just pushed into my brain. That was so cool.
I've been told I do that, so sorry everybody. Yeah, the impoundment is generally just a couple feet deep in the summertime, and add a couple 2 to 3 feet on top of that throughout. So it's not super deep, although it seems like it when you're out there. But 2 to 3 feet deep in the summer, and 4 to 5 to 6 in the winter.
Awesome. The next question is from David. What species will be planted in the scrub area?
Yeah, to be determined. A lot of that is going to be based on the soil conditions. I don't want to put something that loves acidity and all of a sudden it's not going to work there. So we'll do soil tests before we get to that point. We'll have plenty of time when we dredge the stuff to let it get settled and all that to run the test, and then be able to identify the plants and source them and put them out there. So to be determined, but the key goal for that spot is to basically be different. And so something that isn't necessarily in the area, but will still be beneficial to migratory birds and things like that.
And then we have a couple questions concerning invasive fish or invasive turtles, not just invasive plants, that might be at the refuge? And do you have to deal with those sorts of invasives as well?
Oh yeah, Heinz is not a perfect ecosystem, but it is improving, I would say. But there are a number of invasive species, animal species that will have established populations, and they're not going anywhere. The two main ones, red-eared sliders, a part of the turtle trade years ago, popular pets, but they live for 30, 40 years. And so what's cute at, the size of I don't know, a jar lid, and then it grows all of a sudden to the size of like a dinner plate in 10, 15 years. And then that youth heads off to college, and then the parents say, oh, I don't want this. So they take it and they dump it out in the river thinking it's a great thing. But what it does is it disrupts ecosystems. It affects, I didn't answer what turtle species. It impacts our native turtle species, red-bellied, northern red-bellied cooter, eastern painted turtles. What else am I missing? So we have red-eared sliders at the refuge, yellow-bellied sliders, another non-native invasive. We also have common snapping turtles. We have box turtles, musk turtles. We did have a sighting of a spiny softshell this year, so that was kind of cool. We don't have an established population of them, so but a number of native turtle species at the refuge, but the red-eared sliders will compete with them. And then the other main invasive plant or invasive animal is the northern snakehead. It's a fish, a top-level predator from kind of East Asia, China area, that just kind of gobbles up everything, and they're an ambush predator, live in the vegetation. And those are two of the biggest ones that we try to manage, as well as, now that I think about it, common carp. They're inside the impoundment. We try to manage the common carp. They are a species that they're naturalized to the air. We're never going to get rid of them, but their biology is to literally suck up mud, spit it out, and then eat all the good stuff that they want. They're omnivores, so they'll eat the bugs and the seeds and everything else. But all that muck makes the water very dirty. Turbid is the term, and makes it difficult for other fish. And so we've, in the last few years, had a pretty intensive effort to remove as many invasive carp as possible. We're up to about 2,000 or so in 2 summers. And we're already seeing improved water quality and clarity. And so now we're just trying to make it as good as possible.
I have a question now that I'm piggybacking. This is my personal question.
Sure.
So do you, like with climate change, do you see species of fish and turtle like that are usually found further south coming up here?
It's not that those are migrating, and it's a lot slower than people think. It's not like we're seeing miles and miles and miles every year. It's a very slow creep, and you're comparing data from the 80s to now. So that's a lot of kind of the stuff that you're looking at. It's not like, oh well, that tree moved 30 yards that way this year. That's fun. But it's for the species, a lot of times it ends up being human induced for the non-native species. Pet trade, things like that. That's where the invasive species come into play. And the native species, they're going to do what they can if the habitat is available. And so that's where having protected spaces, planning for sea level rise and planning for these things 30, 40 years down the road, hopefully allows these species to adapt.
Gotcha. You kind of touched on this already, but this is a question from Warwick. Do you have to weigh the conservation restoration requirements of the preserve versus the recreational and access requirements of the community? And I guess that you guys do that over at the refuge. And you'd mentioned something about I think going to meetings. Like, do you guys show up at like community meetings and talk with people and stuff like that as well?
Yeah, the community engagement specialist, that's part of her job, is to go out and build those relationships, because it's never just hey, we're going to show up and put a pollinator garden in a vacant lot. I hope you enjoy this. Goodbye. That's not the goal. And the whole point is to ask community leaders, what do they want? And so, when over the last few years, and by few I really mean a decade, over the last decade of working with community leaders to identify them and say, what do you need? Well, we have these vacant lots and we'd like to make them more beautiful and get rid of short dumping. It increases housing values, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, great, we can do that. And then we came up with the idea of pollinator gardens, et cetera. So we started from one spot and moved to the next. Some of the old ecological model was, all right, let's plant a bunch of trees because, and I'm a fan of this, planting oak trees, great. Doug Tallamy building, planting oak trees, great for a lot of birds, produces insects. But if you just say we just want to plant oak trees and get hyper focused on that, then you're losing the voice of the community, which says, well, yeah, that sounds great, but we don't really want to, who's going to maintain these trees? Who's going to pay for them if they mess up our roots? It's a bad example because oak trees don't do that, but or if they mess up our sidewalks, I should say, if the roots mess up our sidewalks, things like that. So we want to make sure we're hearing those voices and then coming up with a solution that works for those community members and for those community leaders.
This is kind of a follow-up question that I'm thinking about right now. As far as the vacant lots go, do you all try to track down the owners of these vacant lots? Are these just kind of absentee owners?
The easiest thing to do right now, while we're building momentum, is just working with the city of Philadelphia. They own a number of them, and
Gotcha.
And so that's the easiest thing, is just to start with that.
Yeah.
If we end up getting millions and millions and millions of dollars and have teams and teams of people who can work on this, sure, maybe. But for now, we're going to start small, keep working with one partner, and build momentum from there.
Awesome.
And then as far as towing the line between recreation and as well as restoration, yeah, there are, the entire refuge isn't necessarily open to fishing. We build fishing platforms and fishing piers and set aside areas so we can find that balance. And it's a constant conversation with leadership. There's never a simple answer, but we do our best to find that line and make sure that we're finding the right voice and following that line. And sometimes we're on one side, sometimes we're on the other. That's the job. But we do our best to find that, to stay on the line, so to speak, and find that balance.
That's awesome. I especially love that with the vacant lots, because every time I see a vacant lot, and I live right over the bridge in Collingswood, but see a lot of vacant lots over here, and I'm just like, I just want to plant stuff in them. So I'm so glad. I had no idea you guys were doing that over in Philly. So it's awesome. On to the next question. Gary asks, what depth of soil is necessary to kill the Phragmites?
We're going to find out. We're just going to put as much as we can on top, and then see how it responds and manage as necessary. It's not a simple answer. It's at least not one that I'm aware of. But the more that we can stress it out, the better. And so hopefully what we're able to do is stress it and manage it to a point where it is no longer the dominant thing, and at least knock it back. But as long as Heinz is there and as long as we have a staff, we're going to keep managing it. And once we put the work into fixing these places, hoping to maintain it as well. And also where the weed warriors come into play.
I'm always curious about that, because that stuff is everywhere. And I'm just like, how do you even manage that? How do you even tackle that? So
there's a number of different strategies. Flooding it, if you can stress it out. There's actually some really interesting work on, which really only works in brackish saltwater areas, is to add literally lots and lots of pounds of sugar. It's not feasible large scale like at a refuge, but the way the sugar interacts with the salt, it basically kills the plant. It creates some toxic compounds and whatnot. But this is great for like a homeowner, but like we're not going to suddenly dump thousands of gallons of thousands of pounds of raw sugar on the refuge or anything like that. Also, it wouldn't work on freshwater areas. But there's some fun. People are trying new ideas and trying new things, is more my point.
Cool. Helen asks, do you ever work with Mount Cuba native plant trials to choose the plants that you use?
We don't, but I have looked at their website. What was actually interesting about that pollinator study is that they found very similar numbers to them, and they're not too far away. And so this is work with Dr. Gelhaus from the Academy of Natural Sciences and Drexel University, that we're going to look at that data, kind of comparing the two and seeing what they found, what we found, similarities, differences. But from pulling the plants, I've used that site, but I also use the resources that I threw in the chat a little bit earlier.
Awesome. Let's see, we're coming to the end. Amy asks, is purple loosestrife a problem anymore?
Of course, all invasive species will be a problem. And then, very rarely do you really get the opportunity to eradicate an invasive species from an area. They live in the seed bank, but certain areas are better than others. And we had a couple interns this summer who actually mapped all of our invasive species on the refuge and estimated their percentages and cover. And we did this about 6 years ago. And so now we'll be able to compare the two data sets to see where have we done well, where have we not, where are things getting worse, where are they getting better, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll keep doing that survey every 5 to 6 to 7 years. So we can keep measuring how we're doing. This is the benefit of great technology and GIS and things like that.
Awesome. Well, that wraps it up for questions. I think Laura had a question about the tides, but we had Debbie pop in to answer that question for her. Oh, wait a second. Phaedra's now asking a question. Getting it right in there under the line. What's your favorite part of the refuge and your favorite wildlife sighting?
I think my favorite part of the refuge is what we call the big boardwalk. There's a boardwalk that cuts across that impoundment. And from that spot, you can see basking turtles, but I also get a chance to run into people and just have great conversations. Because anytime I'm out wearing this uniform, somebody just had a question, which is always what you want to hear. And I'll get everything from, once they figure out that I'm a biologist, they'll be like, I'll get everything from anything biology related, put it that way. But it's great to have those conversations, to hear and help people connect and hopefully walk away with a positive experience. And then fun wildlife sightings. Let's see. There was a king rail this summer. That was pretty cool. That was a lifer for me. It's a bird, for those who aren't aware. We'll see. We did deer surveys a couple years back to see what our deer population is, and had a huge beaver walk across the road. So that was pretty cool.
Adorable.
I've only ever seen him in the water. So to see it out of water, going from one water body to the other, I was like, it was huge. What else? A lot of it ended up being birds, because that's what a lot of the community members kind of talk about is, oh, I saw this really cool whatever, and going from there. And then I go out and try to find it as well and learn about it, so that the next time I run into somebody, they can say, what can you tell me about the pie-billed grebe? Well, and try to be informed and as informative as possible.
Fabulous. That was our last question, unless anybody is going to slip one in like real quickly. But and Sue with one last comment says, thanks for the great presentation, very informative. And I must agree, that was an awesome presentation, super informative. Learned a lot about someplace right in my backyard that I pass every time I drive up and down I-95. Oh, we have one more question. Is knotweed a problem there?
Yes, and I actually this afternoon took out a half dozen slides on a knotweed restoration area, a Japanese knotweed, for those who don't know. It's kind of like a bamboo-like plant, and restoration strategy we're trying from some research by Penn State Extension. So we're working on another area, but I was like, am I going to hit 40 minutes or not? And I guess I could have added it, and I had 5 extra minutes there, but but we still get to touch on it. Yes, it is a problem in certain areas, particularly right along the water's edge. And so we do our best to remove it and put native things in its place. But it is very difficult. It is one of the most persistent non-native invasives out there.
Well, on that note, I think that probably is the last question. We're getting a lot of people saying, great presentation. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I second that. So just really appreciate you coming by to talk with us for our Wednesday night webinar series. It's just really valuable information, and I just really appreciate it. Thank you.
happy to help and happy to be here. And if anybody has any other questions that either I wasn't getting to or something that comes up later, I threw my email in the chat. I'm easily available and happy to chat about anything and hopefully answer some questions or at least point you in the right direction. At least I hope it's the right direction.
Thank you so much. And with that, I think we can wish everybody a good night. Thanks everybody for stopping by. We really appreciate it. And I guess we'll see you in actually, hopefully we'll see you all on November 4th for our fall conference. And then our next Wednesday night webinar is December 6th. So see everybody then.
Go Phillies.
Bye-bye.